It's 6:40 in the morning on the body line at the stamping plant off Mound Road, and you've got 58 seconds to put 9 welds into a door panel before it rides on down the belt to the next man, and you have already done it 400 times today before the sun so much as cleared the fence line. The line does not wait for you. It does not care if you slept. It does not care if your kid ran a fever half the night. It moves at exactly the same speed. It moved yesterday and the day before that, and every day for the 26 years your old man stood in roughly this same spot. And either you move with it or you don't. And there is no third option on this floor. Sparks come off the gun in a short white burst that lights up the brass pin on your collar for half a second every single time. The same pin your father wore, local 900, your clock number stamped on the back where nobody but you has ever bothered to look. Down the line, Walt's voice cuts through the stamping press thunder without him even raising it much, calling a bad panel before it's fully past him. And 2 stations over Denise punches her gun home on the beat like a metronome that never once in 4 years has missed a click. The panel comes at you, you drop the gun, 9 welds, hit, spark, and the smell of hot metal that you stopped noticing was a smell about a year into this job, and it's gone down the line before the sound of the last weld even finishes ringing in your ears, and the next one is already coming, because it never stops coming. Somewhere above the line on a catwalk nobody from the floor ever walks, a man in a clean shirt with a clipboard is watching a stopwatch, and you don't know his name, and you've stopped wondering what he writes down. You are 24 years old. You can weld faster and cleaner than anyone on this shift. But Walt himself, you make more money this year than your old man ever made in 1 year of his whole life. And every single morning, for 58 seconds at a time, all day long, this line is your whole world. This is your whole life. On this floor, at this station, you are close to untouchable, and you have earned every second of it. There is not a man on second shift who doesn't know your name, not a foreman who has ever once had to send a panel back down the line because your welds ran cold or crooked. You know this body line the way you know your own hands, which press on the far end runs a half-second slow on a humid day and throws the whole rhythm off if you don't compensate for it before anybody else even notices. Which of the 2 new robot arms out past the paint booth still needs a man standing close in case it hangs up on a panel? Exactly how much lean you can put into your shoulder on weld 6 before it starts wearing on you by hour 8 instead of hour 4. Walt, who trained you from a green kid who couldn't hold a bead straight, tells anybody who'll listen that you've got the fastest clean hands he's seen on this line in 15 years running it. Denise works the station 2 down and has for 4 years, and the 2 of you fell into a rhythm on that line before you ever said more than 10 words to each other off the clock. And now you're married, and she still calls your shift the same way she calls a weld. Steady, no wasted motion. Out here, on this floor, under these lights, you are somebody. But 6 years ago, you were a nobody at all. A kid sweeping metal shavings off a garage floor for tip money, watching your old man come home every night with his hands wrapped and his back bent a little further than the year before, wondering if a job on that line was a life worth wanting or a life worth running from. So let me take you back. Let me show you how a boy who wasn't sure he wanted his father's life ended up building doors on the fastest line in the plant with his own 2 hands, and what the whole country was already quietly deciding, 1 import car and 1 yellow robot arm at a time, to take away from men just like him. You grew up 2 streets over from the plant fence in a neighborhood built entirely out of that plant's paychecks. Brick bungalows lined up close together the same way the men who bought them lined up on the same shift for 30 years straight. Your old man worked that line from the time he came home from Korea until the year his knees finally quit on him, and he never once complained about it where you could hear him. But you saw what it did. The wrap of tape around 2 fingers that never fully healed straight. The way he'd sit in his chair after dinner and not say much of anything for the first half hour, just letting the ringing in his ears from 8 hours of pressed thunder finally settle down. Every man on your street worked some version of that same plant, day shift or night shift, and every summer the whole neighborhood breathed to the rhythm of it. Cookouts timed around shift change, church timed around whoever was working Sundays that quarter, a whole world built around one building at the end of the block. And once in a while, your old man would take you inside on a Saturday when he had to run back for something, and you'd stand at the edge of that floor as a boy no taller than the safety rail. And the noise of it would go through your whole chest like a second heartbeat. Presses slamming down 40 times a minute, sparks flying off 100 welding guns at once. More men working in one room than you'd ever seen in one place in your life. And something in you would go quiet and pay attention in a way it never did anywhere else. Your old man wasn't unhappy exactly, but he was a man who'd given that floor 30 years of his hands and his hearing and a piece of his back. And some nights after dinner, you'd catch him rubbing his knuckles and looking at nothing in particular. And you understood, without him ever once saying it, that this job gave a man a house and a union card and a pension. And it took something back for every bit of it. And you were never entirely sure, watching him, whether the trade was a good one. You were 18 and 2 years out of high school, running a forklift at a warehouse for wages that didn't cover much more than gas and a Friday night, when your uncle, who'd worked the line for 11 years himself, came by the house and told you the plant was hiring off the list again, first time in 3 years, and that a man who got on now, at your age, could put in 30 years and retire younger than his own father had. You filled out the application on the kitchen table that same night with your mother standing over your shoulder, not quite able to hide how much she wanted this for you, and 6 weeks later, a letter came. And you stood in the kitchen and did the math out loud before you'd even sat down. The starting wage alone was more than double the warehouse, and with the shift differential and the overtime that ran thick most months, a young man willing to work every hour the foreman offered him could have a car of his own and a down payment on a house inside of 3 years, something your old man had needed nearly 10 to manage. You thought about the ringing in his ears and the tape on his fingers, and you thought about it hard, standing there with that letter in your hand. And then you thought about the alternative, the warehouse wage, the rented apartment, the slow grinding math of never quite getting ahead. And the arithmetic settled the question for you the same clean way it settles most questions a young man asks about his own life. You didn't need to love the noise or the heat or the smell of hot metal. Not yet, not at 18, standing in your mother's kitchen. You needed a chance to build something with your own 2 hands that a bank would take seriously. And that letter, thin as it was the first one anybody had ever handed you that felt like a real answer. The man who made you into a real line worker was Walt, a broad, quiet man who'd run that same section of the body line for going on 15 years and had trained more green hires than he could put a number to, and who watched you fumble your first 100 welds with a patience that surprised you, given how little patience the line itself ever showed anybody. He didn't teach you to go fast. Going fast, he told you, flat out your first week. is how a man loses 2 fingers or ships a door that fails a crash test 6 months down the road with somebody's family inside it. He taught you the actual trade underneath the noise, how to read the gun's hiss and know a good weld from a cold one before you even looked, how to set your feet and your shoulders so the work came from your whole body instead of just your wrist, how to feel through your boots when a press 2 stations down was running a half beat off before the foreman's stopwatch ever caught it. And then he taught you Walt's rules, the ones that had kept every man he'd trained walking off that floor in one piece for a decade and a half. Rule 1, you never, not once, reach past the safety rail on a moving press, no matter how small the fix looks, no matter how far behind the line you feel. A machine that can stamp a door panel flat in 1/10 of a second does not know the difference between steel and a man's hand. And rule 2, the one he only ever said to you once, dead serious, gripping your shoulder hard enough that you felt it the next day. You watch the man next to you as close as you watch your own station, because his mistake at speed becomes your mistake before either one of you has time to think about it, and there is no amount of skill on earth that can outweld another man's bad moment. Your first full week hitting tack time clean, every panel, no callbacks. You sat in your truck in the parking lot afterward with your hands still buzzing faintly from the gun, and you understood, the way you understand very few things all at once, that you had found work your own 2 hands were actually built for. And you got fast. Fast the way Walt was fast, and then faster. Because you had a hunger to be the best pair of hands on that floor, and a body that was still young enough to give the line everything it asked for without complaint. You learned to read a whole day's rhythm before the first panel even hits your station. Which shift foreman ran the line a hair quick to hit a quota, and which ones held it steady. How to bank 40 extra seconds across a shift by never once wasting a motion. How to keep your bead perfectly clean at hour 7 when your shoulder was screaming the same way it did at hour 1. You cross-trained on 2 neighboring stations on your own time, so you could cover a sick man without the whole line stuttering, picked up shifts other guys turned down, and inside 3 years you were the man Walt called over first whenever a new hire needed to see it done right instead of just told. You learned the whole culture of that floor the way Walt had taught you to learn a weld. The unwritten order of the lunch tables, which foremen you could push back on and which ones you let slide. The quiet code that said you covered for a brother having a bad week, without ever once making him ask for it out loud. And you had Denise 2 stations down, who could read your shift the same way Walt read a bad panel, who started catching your eye across the line before either of you had said much of anything, and who by your 2nd year on the floor had become the person you looked for first thing every single morning before you even clocked in. Together, the 2 of you and the rest of that crew built a reputation up and down the whole plant that no foreman's clipboard could fake. Your section ran clean, ran fast, and never once got the whole line stopped on your account. And on a floor where 900 men clocked in every morning to the exact same building, that reputation was worth more than any bonus a paycheck could hand you. You were 26 years old, and you had built, with your own 2 hands, the fastest, cleanest station on the whole body line. But a line like that takes its cut same as anything else worth having, and it never once tells you up front what the bill is going to look like. First, it took your hearing, slow and quiet, a little more every year, until you found yourself asking Denise to repeat herself at the dinner table in a kitchen that wasn't even loud. It took your shoulder, the same one you'd leaned into 10,000 welds a week for going on 8 years, until some mornings you'd wake up and need a full minute before it would move the way you needed it to. And it took a piece of your time you never quite got back. The birthdays worked through on forced overtime, because the line needed bodies and the money was too good to turn down. The Sunday mornings you slept straight through because your body had nothing left to give a church pew after a week of doubles. Your old man, retired now, watched you come home some nights, barely able to lift a fork, and said less about it than you expected. Until one evening he sat across from you at the table and said, quiet, that he'd hoped you'd find something that didn't take quite as much out of a man as that floor had taken out of him, and that he was proud of you anyway, because a man does what a man has to do for his family, and there was no shame anywhere in that. And Denise watched you rub your shoulder every night after your shift, and never once complained about the overtime. You both knew the mortgage needed, because that was the deal the two of you had made without ever saying it out loud. You'd give that floor everything it asked for, and she'd have dinner waiting, and your shoulder rubbed loose enough to sleep. And between the two of you, you'd make it work. Two things broke, close together, the way it always seems to happen on a floor like that. The first came on a Thursday second shift, when the plant brought in the new robot arm to run alongside the men on the press line, instead of behind a cage the way the older ones ran. A pilot for what management called the modernization, and nobody on the floor had been trained on it for more than 40 minutes before it went live. Walt was the one standing closest when it happened. A hydraulic fault nobody caught in time, the arm swinging through its cycle, a half second off the pattern the men had all just learned to trust. And Walt's hand was where the arm's old, slower cousin would never have reached that fast. He kept the hand. He did not keep full use of 2 fingers, and he did not come back to that floor. Not that year, not ever. And the last thing you remember clearly from that night is the sound the whole line made, stopping all at once. Every press silent within a few seconds of each other for the first time you'd ever heard in 8 years. 900 men standing still in a building built to never stand still. Nobody blamed the robot, exactly, because a robot doesn't have a mind to blame, and nobody official ever quite said whose decision it had been to run men that close to a machine that knew. But you had stood 2 stations down and watched it happen, and no report anybody filed afterward ever fully reached the part of you that kept replaying those 40 minutes of training against 8 years of trusting your own hands completely. The second thing came a few weeks after, and it came for the pin. You were working your own station on a rushed shift, the line running a half beat faster than usual to cover for men pulled to train on the new automated cells, reaching in fast on a panel that hung up wrong, and the edge of your sleeve caught the safety rail hard enough to spin you half around before you got your feet back under you. You walked away with nothing worse than a bruised hip and a scare that took a full hour to stop shaking off. But your collar tore loose in the catch, and the brass pin, your father's pin, local 900, his clock number on the back, came off with it. And by the time you'd steadied yourself and looked down, it was gone, already carried off somewhere down the moving belt or under the catwalk grating in the dark below the line, and you spent your whole break on your hands and knees with a flashlight looking for it, and you never found it. Not that shift, and not ever. Here's the part nobody on that floor ever saw coming all at once, and it wasn't the new robot arm, and it wasn't any one foreman's bad call, and it wasn't any single man's fault at all. It started years before you ever clocked in, back when 2 oil shocks in 1 decade sent American drivers looking hard at small, cheap, thirsty-for-nothing cars for the first time in a generation. And companies on the other side of the ocean had spent that whole decade building exactly that, while Detroit kept building what it had always known how to build. By the time you made line foreman's attention, as a fast young hand, a car built an ocean away and shipped in on a boat was already outselling half of what rolled off floors like yours, not because anybody hated Detroit, but because a family doing its own kitchen table arithmetic, same as you once had, looked at a sticker price and a gas gauge and made the same cold, clean calculation you'd made standing in your mother's kitchen years before. And right alongside that, the same modernization that took Walt's fingers kept coming, one yellow arm at a time, because a robot doesn't take a lunch break and doesn't file for a pension and doesn't need 40 minutes of training to be trusted with a task it will now do every day for the next 15 years without complaint. And every arm that went up on that line was, quietly, 3 or 4 men who used to stand exactly where it now stood. And underneath both of those things sat a recession that hit the whole industry at once, hard enough that one of the biggest names in it had to go to the federal government, hat in hand, just to keep its doors open at all. And when a company that size has to fight that hard just to survive, every other company in the business starts counting every dollar the same desperate way, and the union sits down at a table it never wanted to sit at and gives back wages and jobs just to keep the doors open one more model year. There was no one villain in any of it. Just a family's gas mileage math, a machine that never gets tired, and a company 2 states over teaching every other company in Detroit how thin the margins had actually gotten. 3 things nobody on your floor had any real say over, quietly deciding together, 1 quarter at a time, that the number of men a line like yours needed was never going to be what it used to be again. So the announcement came the way it always seems to, on a Tuesday, over a floor-wide intercom instead of from any one man's mouth. The plant would run through the end of the model year and then close its doors for good. The work consolidated into a newer, leaner building 200 miles away that needed a third of the hands yours had. Walt, already gone from the floor but still living 2 streets over, came by the house the week of the announcement with an idea he'd been chewing on since his own accident. A retraining program the union had fought hard to win in the last contract. Seats in a program teaching men exactly like you how to install, maintain, and repair the very robot cells that had started replacing them. Because somebody who understood a weld from the inside out could learn a robot's logic faster than any engineer who'd never stood on a line a day in his life. You signed up the first week, seats open. And on the last day the plant ever ran, the whole shift stood together on the floor one final time, while a union rep walked the line handing out small, glass-fronted boxes. And inside yours was a brass pin, Local 900, a clock number on the back that wasn't your father's and wasn't the one you'd lost, but your own new one, with 2 dates engraved beneath it, the year the plant opened and the year it closed, because somebody in that union hall had decided that a man who gave a building that many years of his hands deserved to walk out with something to show for it, besides a layoff letter. Denise kept her own job 2 towns over at a parts supplier, and between her paycheck and your retraining stipend, you made it through the year it took to get certified. And when the new automated cell contractor company hired you on to service the very kind of arm that had taken Walt's fingers, you took the pin out of its glass box and hung it on a fresh loop of wire, not on a collar this time, but on the ring where you keep the keys to the small repair shop you and Walt opened together 2 years later, because a man needs something to carry with him, even when the floor it came from is gone and never coming back. Look at what they call an assembly line now. Go on. Look. That whole stamping plant off Mound Road is a logistics warehouse today. Acres of painted floor with not one press left standing anywhere in it. And the newer, leaner plant that took its work 200 miles away closed its own doors years back, chased further south and further overseas by the same cold arithmetic that closed yours. The floors that are still running today build cars faster and cleaner than anything your crew ever shipped. But they do it in near silence, banks of arms working in a coordinated blur under white light, with hardly a human voice anywhere on the whole production floor. A handful of technicians in clean uniforms watching screens instead of 900 men calling to each other over the thunder of 40 presses. The union hall your father walked to every month for 30 straight years still stands, but half its old membership rolls belong to men who retired decades ago, and a young person who wants that kind of work today more often signs a contract with a staffing agency for a plant that might relocate again in 5 years, with no PIN, no 30-year pension, no neighborhood built entirely out of one building's paychecks. There's no 18-year-old doing kitchen table math on a hiring letter that changes his whole life anymore, because there's no letter like that left to send, just an application to a contract house and a badge that scans a turnstile instead of a name a foreman actually knows. And the collar of the uniform they hand a technician at an automated plant today has no pin on it at all. Nothing pinned there, nothing to catch the light for half a second when the welding sparks fly. Because nobody who runs these lines today has ever once needed a brass pin to tell them which building, which floor, which 30 years of a man's life it belonged to. So here's the question, friend, and only you can answer it. Was it worth it? The hearing that never came all the way back? The shoulder that still aches on a cold morning? The birthdays worked through on forced overtime for a mortgage that got paid anyway? Walt's 2 fingers, gone in 40 minutes of training against 15 years of trusting a machine to move exactly where it always had. Your father's pin, lost somewhere under a moving belt on a rushed shift, still down there maybe, under a warehouse floor that used to be a line. Would you clock back in and do the whole of it again, knowing everything it was going to cost you? Walt's hand, the pin in the dark, the whole country quietly deciding, 1 import car and 1 yellow arm and 1 federal bailout at a time, that a floor like yours wasn't going to need as many hands as it once did. And here is the truth you would never say out loud to anybody but yourself in the quiet like this. You would. Every single time. Because for a stretch of years on a body line off Mound Road, with a brass pin catching the spark light on your collar and a woman 2 stations down who could read your whole shift by the sound of your gun, you built something with your own 2 hands that put a roof over your family's head and a pension your own father never had. And there is not one silent, humming, robot-run floor they've built since that has ever once made a whole neighborhood breathe to the rhythm of a single building the way yours did. You knew better. You were there, hands on the gun, pin on your collar, before the world decided a line like that didn't need men like you standing on it anymore.
Yellow lines are fading in the rearview mirror now. This ancient highway's quieted its roar. I've driven through the shadows of the only life I knew, and I won't be returning anymore. So farewell to the endless sky and dust upon the breeze, to every town that whispered in the night. The open road is folding like a map of memories, and fading out of sight. Just a single quiet guitar, goodbye to the road.